Welcome back to Common Ground, an inside look at Suffolk County. I'm your host, Sheriff Steve Tompkins. Now, on this side of the show, we've got an extraordinary young man who is actually running as an independent for the office of governor in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and that would be Evan Falchuk. And Evan has an extraordinary story, and he's going to tell us about how he came to not only be a candidate, but why he's running as an independent, where he stands on the issues of importance to both you and I and to the total populace, and what's really significant if we look at ourselves as a group of people, as a society, which is a collective, how do we move forward and take care of ourselves, our kids, and our community? So without any further ado, Evan.
Steve.
Thank you so very much for coming on. So listen, quickly, what inspired you to run for office, the office of governor?
Well, the political process is polarized. I think most of us see that every day, but I think the more worrisome part is how disconnected it's become. That people look at their political leaders and say, whatever priorities they're pursuing, they don't match up with what's important to me. And I'm a person who has been in business for the last 15 years, 14 years actually, in a healthcare company called Best Doctors. I've helped grow that business from a few employees to up over 600. And when you see the problems that are happening in our political process, that disconnect to me is really worrisome, and we need to do something about it. I very much believe that the world is how it is, either because we make it that way or because through our inaction we let it get that way. And I felt like I needed to do something to change it.
So you actually have begun a third party? The United Independent Party?
That's right.
Okay, why run as an independent versus running in the Democratic or the Republican Party?
Well, it's a good question, and a lot of what you see in terms of the disconnect in the political process is driven by what's happening today in the Democratic and Republican parties. There's a lot of interests that fuel those parties, and it makes it difficult for smart, new, independent voices to become involved in the political process. So I saw it as the only avenue to do something entrepreneurial, to create something new that would make it possible for people that have a interesting set of beliefs. I mean, people like I am, who say I am pragmatically progressive. I think everybody's equal. I think everybody's civil rights need to be protected. And I also think the government should spend its money as wisely as it can. Most voters will tell you they don't see either of the two parties as representing that anymore. And a lot of voters will tell you they don't even know where to go to have a rational conversation about that. And so creating a new party is a hugely important part of this. And I think part of the problem that you hear about from voters too is that they feel as if there are candidates who are running for their own personal career advancement. And it's never about something bigger than the candidate. It's never about a cause. And so I felt it was an extraordinarily important opportunity in this time to create that new avenue. And that's what United Independent Party is.
Well, if you believe in the old adage, there's strength in numbers. Clearly with an independent party, clearly with a new party, you don't have that strength behind you. How do you cut through the fog? How do you cut through the noise as an independent if you don't have the unity of a number of voices speaking in tandem with you?
It's like anything else that you start that's new, there's a lot of hard work involved in building up an organization. The interesting dynamic in Massachusetts today is that 53% of voters, 53%, the majority, are now not enrolled in one of the political parties. So they've chosen to be independent. Only 35% are Democrats, 11% are Republicans. So we're used to thinking about independent voters as sort of swing voters. The reality is that we're in the majority now. And the question is, can we build an organized way, an organized platform to bring some of those new ideas and voices and just reasonable, rational conversation about politics into the mix? And so it takes doing it in a very deliberate way. I mean, we're very organized. We're working very hard to create it. You know, I've been out there covering the state, been in more than 50 cities and towns over the last several months, talking about this with people, getting into real conversations. The level of interest in this is extraordinarily high. 58% of voters in a poll that we did said they would like to see an independent third party in Massachusetts.
You know, when you talk about politics and you talk about the rationality of politics, I find what you're saying to be very uplifting. Because we do need to get back to a place where we can really have concerted conversation about the issues of importance to folks. With that said, what issues are you really trumpeting? What are the issues that are near and dear to your heart when you're standing in front of folks? What is the first 2 or 3 things that you start talking about?
What becomes very clear when you meet people is how much they don't have trust and confidence in the state government. they may come at it in a lot of different ways. There might be a particular issue someone's talking about, but at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. And to me, that's a very worrisome trend, that we need our state government to do so many important things. We need our federal government to do so many important things. But as long as people say, I think the system is rigged, I've heard people say that. I've heard people say, I don't think anybody really cares anymore. These are very troubling things. And I think we take for granted our democracy and our democratic process. And it is, again, one of those things where it only continues as long as we make it that way. So restoring the trust and confidence people need to have in the state government is my highest priority and theme. To me, the way to go about doing it, because the things that I hear over and over again have to do with how the state spends its money, is to have a really thorough review of our state's budget. Most of the state's budget is available online, but not in a way that's really very easy to see what's happening. A lot of our state spending is not available to the public to examine. If only 3% of the state's money was misallocated, in other words, it's being spent on things that we don't need it to be spent on, that's $1 billion a year that could go for job training, for education, for transportation initiatives, for all kinds of things that people want, that we hear from the state that there isn't money for, but it's possible to find if we work at it.
Talk to me about, we just come through this long mayor's race in the city of Boston. And the issues that you heard the most about: education, public safety, the economy, healthcare, housing. Let's start with education. Where do you come down on education?
The state has a formula that we've been using for education for some time, and I don't think it's equitable. I think it distributes the money in ways that don't help the communities that are in most need as much as they should. And I think it's time for us to look at that again. I also think that the idea that education is a one-size-fits-all approach is wrong. I think it's added some things that have helped. I think all the standardized testing has helped in certain communities, in certain schools to help raise those standards. But educating a child is a lot more complicated than just whether or not they're good at math and English. There are a whole lot of supports that need to be available to kids, particularly in less privileged areas where maybe the kids come from different kinds of family structures than what we might see in a well-off suburb, where the state doesn't do enough to help fund those needed programs. So I think about things like social workers and other extenders for the teachers to help provide those supports to the kids. If a child is dealing with a difficult situation at home, maybe they're having some trauma from it that creates mental health issues, this is going to start off the child on a route in their life that is not going to be helpful. We as a state fail in our responsibility to that child when we don't provide those types of services. And so I think we need to be looking at this in an extremely comprehensive and aggressive way to make sure that every child ends up with the right kind of education for them.
Public versus charter. Where do you come down on the schools?
It shouldn't be one versus the other. There are places where charter schools make a huge difference. I've spent a good amount of time up in Lawrence in working with people in the Dominican community there with a particular program that I really like that works with entrepreneurs. But the Lawrence has a wonderful charter school that operates in a city in which the state has taken over the public school systems. And they're making improvements in the public school systems, but this charter school there is doing a remarkable job against the odds, against what people would say is possible. So it's not one or the other. We need a broad mix of both in order to make things work.
Let's talk to me about economics. Talk to me about job creation. Talk to me about keeping companies that are here that are looking to leave Massachusetts to go elsewhere. What do you say to the business community to really spark their interest in you and your candidacy?
Absolutely. I'm a business person myself. That's how I've learned the ropes of growing a business is by doing it. And I know what the challenges are that businesses face. And small and medium-sized businesses are the engines of economic growth in the 21st century. That's where it's going to come from. And the challenges those companies face here in Massachusetts are costs. They're very high, particularly healthcare costs. We've got the highest healthcare costs in the country. And the driver of this has to do with the way our healthcare market is set up. We've got 3 health insurance companies that have 79% of the market. We've got a small and perhaps shrinking number of hospital systems that have about 72% of the market. And there's a point at which the kind of market power that these entities have distorts the market. They start to look like monopolistic entities. They start to do things that make the prices go up and the quality of the product go down. So when you see your doctor and you know your doctor has to see 30 patients that day and can only spend 10 minutes with you, that's because of the way the market is set up. As if your premium is going up and so is your deductible at the same time, that has to do with the way your market is set up. The state has an obligation to actually stop those things from happening. And unfortunately, for a long time, we've not only been watching it, but the state has been facilitating it in many ways. It's the responsibility of the state to stop those sorts of practices, and it's the responsibility of the state to look at it in a very strategic way and say, this isn't about an ideology around healthcare. This is about how do we make sure that small and medium-sized businesses are able to succeed in our state.
And how is that? How does that happen?
You take really big entities like this. I mean, look, we've had rules on the books for more than 100 years
Right.
for how you deal with those kinds of practices. And you make them into smaller size groups, and you have them change their business practices. There are a lot of things we can look at around the world, but even here at home, if you're a big company in the United States, I'm talking about companies with thousands of employees,
Right.
you don't buy any health insurance at all. You provide health insurance as a cost of your doing business, and you use the health insurance company as an administrator. So that's a big advantage those companies have, and believe me, if they thought buying health insurance was a good deal, they would buy health insurance. It's not. We need to make it possible for small and medium-sized businesses to enjoy that same kind of pricing structure that the big ones do. It creates a competitive disadvantage for these companies, makes them harder to grow, and that's exactly the engine of growth. So our state should be looking at this in a very strategic way. But how do we help those businesses grow, and attacking the problem of healthcare costs once and for all is to me the largest thing we can do.
Aside from healthcare costs, how would you grow jobs? How do you bring about more jobs? Is it through tax incentives? Is it through innovative entrepreneurial programs? How would you do that?
We've got some great stuff happening in Massachusetts because we do have such a thriving innovation economy.
Right.
So these companies do start here. I will say that there's a big middle. There's a lot of companies that have started, they succeed, they're small businesses, and they might have 2 or 3 employees.
Right.
The real question is, how do you get them from 2 or 3 employees to 10 or 20 or 50? To be like my company was, 9 people up to 600.
Right.
Those are the success stories we want to see.
Right.
And it's very difficult to pick those out up front. But what you can do is say, what are the conditions that are needed for that to happen? So we already talked a little bit about the cost structure of these companies. But a lot of the time for those entrepreneurs, and these are people that are working as hard as anyone and have such a passion for what it is that they do, maybe what's missing are some skills. Maybe what's missing is a network of people that can help them in growing their business. And when I talk about this, know that there are organizations that do this kind of work. The one I mentioned that I work with in Lawrence is called Enterprise, and they do a program called the Streetwise MBA. And they enroll business owners like this that have they've got a business that exists, and they help them understand how to take it to the next level.
Right.
And it has remarkable success. The state barely funds programs like that. So when we think about economic development, it should be that we take a look at those areas where you say, boy, that's the diamond in the rough for all those companies. And there are thousands of them across the state, where if we can just give them a little bit of an additional help with some skills and a network and some ways of how to grow their business even more, we can start to see that kind of thriving economy continue to grow.
How do we create more housing for low-income and moderate-income folks in the Commonwealth so that they do have really good, decent places to live that they can afford?
Right. Hugely important issue, and it's one of the things that again is a barrier for businesses to grow. If it's too expensive to hire workers in Massachusetts, it's much easier to move them elsewhere. And we have not done as good a job as we could have with housing. I think we've systematically underinvested in housing, like in many areas, such as transportation. So we don't strategically, as a state, plan very well around these things. So you might see low-income housing being built in communities